Computer. Okay. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth tongue and myth busting, in a special All Things Canada edition. It's July 1st, which is Canada Day, and joining me on the program to shit on Canada Day, but celebrates, I hope, the incredible social movements, people power movements. We have three guests. I hope. We have three guests. We have three guests joining us. We have three of Canada's leading truth tellers and mythbusters. Back on the program, back on the show is documentary filmmaker of the six-part docuseries on Canadian imperialism, Truth to the Powerless. We have, and forgive me in advance for butchering your name, we have Pitasanna Shanmugathas. I know I'm butchering your name, Pizza, so forgive me for that. And our other returning champion is historian, media critic, and anti-imperialist Tyler A. Shipley, who is professor of society, culture, and commerce in the Department of Liberal Studies at the Humber College Institute of Technology and Advanced Learning, and he is the author of Canada in the World, Settler Capitalism and the Colonial Imagination, and Ottawan Empire, Canada and the Military Coup in Honduras. We're hoping that Yves Engler joins us, but he told us to start without him. So, gentlemen, first of all, thank you so much for coming on the program. And I kind of feel like this is sort of like, the Musketeers, the Stooges, or the whole Marvel universe, like the Avengers, like all coming together right here.
Thank you for having us. Thank you for having us. That's a very honorific title.
Well, it's not well. It's an honor to have you guys here. So, and yeah, let's get started. And the only thing I just have to say, which would kind of make this whole conversation even more epic, is if we had Richard Sanders joining us. But I think that would give all of like the right wingers and centrists and and left nationalists like a heart attack if we had just like too many like truth tellers and mythbusters.
It is funny
there's only so much truth that a heart can handle, right?
Yeah, your Avengers metaphor, it would mean that today would ultimately be Ultron Day, and society is celebrating Ultron today, and so yeah, which feels about right.
But who would be Ultron in this scenario? Would that be like Ezra Levant? Would that be one of the douchebags of like the National Burnt Toast? I mean, the National Post. Like would they be like Ultron, and then Justin Trudeau would be like the CIA hero that shows up in like Black Panthers?
Right. Yeah.
Like how that's
their powers combined.
Like where would they fit in that scenario where we're like the truth telling like superheroes and whatnot?
Yeah, I don't know, but I know it's not fun to be in Ultron's world on Ultron Day. That's for sure.
Well, if there's any consolation, Pride is happening. So solidarity to our 2S LGBTQIA plus brothers and sisters and persons. I hope they're having a good one. And while we while we can criticize some of the pink washing and rainbow capitalism, that does have that any pride thing. I think, I still think, I still think, all power to our, to our 2S LGBTQIA brothers and sisters and persons, and power to the people, death to heteronormativity, and then solidarity forever to them, especially with the like intense new stage of like queer phobia, particularly transphobia, that's been going on. So all right, but so gentlemen, let's begin. My first question, Petsa, we're going to start with you, and then Tyler, you can give your response, and then we'll rotate, and then we'll rotate like that, and hopefully Yves Engler will join us. So, my first question is, those calling for, or even protesting Canada Day because of past and present apartheid towards Indigenous people. Are the boundaries when debating this day, however, only limited to that? In other words, but not, yeah. Are the terms of when people are allowed to criticize Canada Day, is it only limited to Canada's settler colonialism? And when somebody does bring up past and present Canadian imperialism, especially in other words, is it more difficult to speak out on Canadian imperialism on Canada Day, and especially in light of the Ukraine-Russia NATO war, in which Team Canada is firmly behind its client state Ukraine. And so I wanted your response to that. Petsa, we'll start with you, and then Tyler, you can give your response.
Yeah, I don't think that Canada should solely be confined to discussing the issue of the genocide of the Indigenous people, as horrendous as that is, and it's very much an ongoing process. And when I was in school, in the public education system in high school and middle school, and to the extent that our education system was critical about Canada, the Canadian government, it was really focused on our atrocities towards the Indigenous people. So we learned about the residential school system and how this cultural genocide of the Indigenous people, how Indigenous children were separated from their parents, but even that education is very limited. We didn't learn, for instance, how during apartheid South Africa, the white minority officials, they would come to Canada, observe our Indigenous reservation systems, and use that as a model in apartheid South Africa to how they modeled the Bantustans, how they oppressed, segregated the Black Indigenous population. We never learned that in school, in middle school, or in high school. I was one day my history teacher, I think it was like ninth grade or something, asked the class, what is one of the benefits of joining the military? And I looked around the class, and nobody was raising their hand. So I raised my hand and I said, the benefit of joining the Canadian military is that you get a free funeral. And the entire class just erupted in laughter. But then I was serious. I felt that is the benefit of joining the military. I couldn't understand why. And I have a right, and that was in the ninth grade. Now I have a master's degree in global affairs, and I know a lot more than I did then. But I still can't understand why Canadians would willingly want to put their lives at risk, for these horrendous, futile wars in Afghanistan. These wars, like in Libya and all these. Why would they want to put their lives at risk for these futile imperialist wars? I couldn't understand it. So, that seemed to be the only benefit that I could think of. And so certainly in Canada, our history, our understanding has to extend beyond the horrendous treatment of ongoing treatment of the Indigenous population. And certainly in the context of Russia, Ukraine, what's going on now, it's becoming increasingly difficult to really expose the truth, because there's just a huge multi-million-dollar media brainwashing that's going on. And, we see that now with the Dimitri Lascaris, his Canadian-wide tour is just, I think in one of his recent stops, and I think it was Montreal, it was another incident where I believe the venue, they had to cancel last minute because of these pro-Ukrainian demonstrators were really posing a threat. So, fortunately, Dimitri gathered a couple of the attendees, and they kind of did like an outside public speaking engagement, but it's that's just an instance of how visceral really the pro-war voices are in this country, and certainly on candidates, kind of the propaganda and the ultra patriotism. Patriotism. I'm often against this notion of patriotism because I feel it's blinding. It's totally blinding. It blinds you. It makes you incapable of any introspection, of any ability to criticize the wrongdoings of your country. So and often, I'll say this last thing. Often we're kind of people like myself, maybe people like Tyler and Yves, were kind of looked at as being haters of Canada or anti-Canadian or whatever. But I would contest that. I would contest that assertion because I think it's because we love our country so much. It's because of that we're actually willing to speak out when it's doing wrong because we want it to do better. You know, so I'm not saying that's patriotism. I just think that's a moral duty for us as Canadians. I think we all have that duty. So
also, patriotism is the last refuge of a scoundrel. Tyler, your response.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the thrust of a lot of what you were saying there, Pita. I disagree on the last point just a little bit, in that I'm happy to be labeled a hater of Canada. I absolutely am a hater of Canada, and I'm very precise about what I mean when I say that. It doesn't mean that I hate any of you. I hate the institution called Canada. I think that the institution called Canada exists to do tremendous harm on behalf of a very small ruling class against a very large multiracial working class. And so I do hate the institution called Canada. And obviously I hate the day that celebrates it. And I hate anything that tries to wrap up, our appreciation of our neighbors, our appreciation of our community, of people that we care about, and turn that into supporting Canada. And I think that's often how this kind of a day gets set up. You're led to think that what you're supposed to do on Canada Day is be happy for the community you live in and the great people around you, and isn't it great that Canada provides this? And my response is that Canada didn't provide this. Canada does everything it can to break this in so many different ways, right? I mean, I literally today had someone come to my door to do fundraising for the local hospital, on a day where a lot of people in Canada are going to be encouraged to celebrate the fact that Canada provides free public health care. Our hospitals are falling apart because they're chronically underfunded, and to the extent that they have to be fundraising door to door. And that harms my community. Like, that harms people I care about, and our failing healthcare system harms the people I care about. So it's not that I don't care about those people. I genuinely do. I care about the people around me, but what I don't care about is Canada, the thing called Canada. So that's it's a pretty subtle distinction from what you were saying, Pita. But I certainly agree with you that patriotism is something that is designed to stop any kind of critical thought. Patriotism exists to sell people an abstract idea of what their community is, but one that serves, again, the needs and interests of the ruling class. If I view my community as Canada, then I'm going to support a lot of things that the Canadian government does because it claims to be doing things on behalf of all Canadians. But I don't. That's not my community, right? I have a bunch of different communities, whether it's my friend groups, my political organizations, whether it's my students. There's a whole bunch of different groups of people that I consider to be my community and who I would fight for, in a lot of different ways, physically if necessary. That's increasingly a concern for us in universities and colleges. Given what happened just a few days ago at Waterloo, a direct result of the increasing tide of right-wing organizing in Canada.
Actually, Tyler, sorry to interrupt, but I actually don't know exactly what happened. So what actually happened in the this is the University of Waterloo? What happens?
Right. Sorry, Youri. I forget that you're not here, so you wouldn't be in the news cycle.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
when I do
unfortunately,
when I
yeah,
do follow
unfortunately,
Canada, it's always like the imperialism front, the occasional like five like headlines of like the National Post, CBC, and like Global, but yes, but not up to speed on like all of the local news and whatnot that's going on.
for sure. Yeah. Sorry about that. I should have remembered that. Yeah. I mean, what happened is that a right wing, a sort of mobilized by the right, angry man walked into a classroom at Waterloo University, asked if it was a gender studies course. And when someone did confirm that it was a gender studies course, this guy pulled out a knife and attacked the professor and some of the students. Um, Three
Wow.
people are in hospital right now. So when I think about what is my community, my students are my community, and it would be important to me to stand up for and celebrate my community in that sense. But what I have to stand up to and stand up against is often Canada, or people mobilized by Canada. I mean, I don't know this specific attacker's relationship to the thing called Canada, but what I do know is that he's obviously mobilized by a lot of right-wing pundits here, people like Jordan Peterson and I don't know, Kian Bosch, I don't know, whatever, these guys.
Rebel media.
Yeah, for sure. Rebel media, absolutely. And they all drape themselves in the idea of Canada, right? They drape themselves in Canadian nationalism. They claim to be trying to save Canada from traitors like Justin Trudeau, which of course is nonsense. I wish he was. Right. So yeah, all of that is, I know that's a bit of a vague and abstract response, but it's to say that, I don't think of my community as being Canada. I think of Canada as a specific political imposition, an imposition that was put upon Indigenous nations first, and then the rest of us as the multiracial working classes here. And so, to sum up, I would come back to where you started, Pita, which is to say that I also don't think our criticism of Canada should be limited to criticizing the colonial violence that founded Canada. Instead, I would suggest, and obviously this is kind of my thing, but I would suggest that we think about that colonial violence as being the DNA of what Canada is. So, to the extent that we talk about and remember the residential schools, the destruction of non-Indigenous societies, the genocide, cultural and literal genocide of Indigenous nations and people, and the logic behind that to destroy Indigenous systems and impose capitalism and capitalist labor relations and land property ownership in this place, that is the DNA of Canada. And everything that Canada does around the world essentially flows from that same genetic code, that same foundation. So in that sense, yeah, we have to be critical of all of it, and I think understand the relationship between that early sort of forming period of what Canada is and then what Canada becomes. Whether it's invading El Salvador in the 1930s, assassinating Patrice Lumumba in the Congo in the 1960s, torturing Somali children in the 90s, the war in Afghanistan in the 2010s. I mean, you can just run down the list, and they all flow back to the logic, the material and ideological logic of colonialism. So, fuck Canada Day, and I'm a hater.
Here, but actually, I'm gonna ask this follow-up question before I ask our mutual friend and comrade Pizza about Truth to the Powerless. What about Canada should one be celebrating? Because of course there's because yeah, you know what? Yeah, because of course I might sound like somebody defending Canada Day who will go, hey, look, I know hey, look, Canada has lots of problems. There's income inequality. yes, there's ongoing apartheid towards Indigenous people, which we still have to reckon with and we have to dismantle. And so somebody will respond like that, and of course, somebody will say that we have our own problems when it comes to police brutality, and we even have our own right wing douchebags. But but there's lots to be proud about Canada. But there's lots to be proud about Canada. I don't, and I guess if I could say the things about Canada that Canadians should be proud of, I would say it is the people power movement. It is those beautiful, albeit marginalized communities, the black Canadian community, the Indigenous communities, the working class communities, which fight day in and day out, always for a better tomorrow, and are fighting and are fighting the everyday evils that happen in this country. Tyler, you mentioned this person that who's involved in this fundraiser for a hospital, and doing the work which really federal and provincial governments should be doing. So yeah, I'm curious, what would be what's your response? What's your response to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think my quick one, and I'll certainly let Pita take this up as well, but I think my quick response to that would be to say, none of the things that are good, none of the good work that is done in this place relies on Canada or is related to Canada in any way. So, I'm wearing, I don't know if you can see it, I'm wearing a Louis Riel shirt today. It's my Canada Day shirt is Louis Riel. Louis Riel was killed by Canada, right? He was sentenced to death by Canada, and fought against Canada, fought against the armies, the militaries and paramilitaries of Canada twice. And
Quebecer,
so,
right?
I'm sorry?
He was a Quebecer, right?
No, Louis Riel was a Métis leader out in what is now Manitoba and Saskatchewan, and Riel was one of, and there were many, and his role gets overstated, but Louis Riel was one of the leaders of the Northwest, the resistance. It's sometimes called the Northwest Rebellion, Red River Rebellion. Different terms at different times are used, but these acts of resistance against the encroachment of Canada, and as part of the sovereign, they declared a sovereign nation at Red River under Métis leadership, with a lot of support from settler farmers, and relations with the Cree as well, and staged this attempt to fight against Canada, and Canada crushed it with force, violent, horrific violence, to crush that rebellion. So I would use Riel as one example of a way that you can celebrate resistance and struggle that took place on the land that is now Canada, in some cases by people that might have even been legally Canadian citizens, but any of those struggles that we really, if we really look at them closely, any of the struggles that we value will have been fought against Canada. Again, even to come back to healthcare for a moment, to the extent that Canadians have had access to free healthcare for a stretch of time, that's because socialists fought for it against Canada. Socialists fought against the ruling class of Canada and only won free healthcare because there was a massively mobilized working class at a time where socialist parties around the world and communist parties around the world were threatening to build real revolutions, and the Western powers were trying desperately to buy off the working class to stop a kind of broader kind of revolutionary movement. And in that moment, they conceded and gave us free healthcare, which they didn't want to do. So, that's a moment in which you can say something good happened here. There were people worth celebrating here, but they had to fight against Canada to do the things that we would celebrate. And so in that sense, I still reject the premise that there's anything good to celebrate about Canada. The good things that have happened here have happened in spite of Canada. And so yeah, that would be my quick response. But Pita, I don't know if you want to jump in.
Yes, I'm curious your response, Pizza.
Tyler, you had said a lot of what was on my mind, especially about our public healthcare system. It's interesting. I'll just add this little tidbit of information in Lester B. Pearson's memoirs. I think when the question is posed, what does he want? What is his greatest achievement? What does he want to be most remembered for? He doesn't talk. He doesn't say that it should be his collaboration with the labor leader Tommy Douglas to bring about this public healthcare system, that's so praised. And that's not what he says. He says that I want to be my greatest achievement. What I want to be remembered for is my instrumental role in the founding of NATO. So that really says a lot about Canadian leaders and their mentality. It's not allied towards the struggle of the working class. It's allied towards military hegemony, imperialism. So that's where. So I'll just leave it there.
Well, and that's actually a perfect segue to. It's actually just before I ask a follow up about your documentary, when okay, so Canada Day is celebrated, and if you turn on, so if I was to live in Canada, and we actually do need to set up a campaign of me moving to Canada, but that's good, but that we'll have to talk about like off the air. So, but if I was to move to Canada and I'm in whatever province I'm going to live in. It could be Ontario, it could be Nova Scotia, and I turn on the television and see TV or Global TV, or the CBC is celebrating Canada Day. Are they actually even going to talk about those ordinary men and women, those working class heroes that actually fought for a single payer healthcare, which unfortunately mental health and dental health isn't included in that? but will they talk about will they talk about those those unions, those those leftists that fought for it? Will they talk about, if we talk about the Black civil rights struggles of Canada, will they talk about that, or will they actually ignore that? And if they do talk about it, is it always from that false liberal spin in history, in which change always came from the benevolent top, not through mass people power movements and humongous struggle? Pizza, you can answer that, and Tyler can answer
that. And I think that if you came here as a new immigrant to Canada, you won't be. The society has become so demoralized by neoliberalism, by the ravages of neoliberalism, that you will not really find yourself exposed to the voices of the left wing, the socialists, those that are trying to challenge the power of the neoliberal policies that our governments are enacting. I think that there's such a strong demoralization that unfortunately a lot of those voices are stifled, but there are certainly rays of hope, and there's certainly rays of optimism. I've worked with groups like the Canadian Voice of Women for Peace that are very much out there mobilizing and trying to build up resistance, especially on the anti-war front. So I think that's just my quick take on that.
And before Tyler responds, look who's joined us, 1+1 audience. It's Yves Engler, which means I got it. So yes. So our third guest has joined us. Last but not least, we're joined just now with Yves Engler, historian, media critic, NGO critic, anti-imperialist thinker and activist, member of Disruption Canada and the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, and the author of the Black Book of Canadian Foreign Policy, Canada and Haiti, Waging a War on the Poor Majority, which he did with Anthony Fenton, Canada and Israel, Building Apartheid, Lester Pearson's Peacekeeping, The Truth Will Hurt, Canada and Africa, 300 Years of Aid and Exploitation, a propaganda system, how Canadian governments, corporations, media, and academia sell war and exploitation, especially on Canada Day, writes The Ugly Canadians, Stephen Harper's foreign policy. Left to right, marching to the beat of Imperial Canada, House of Mirrors, Justin Trudeau's foreign policy, Stand on Guard from Whom, A People's History of the Canadian Military, Stop Signs, Cars and Capitalism on the Road to Economic, Social, and Ecological Decay, which he co-wrote with Bianca Mugeni, who is the director of the CFPI, and his wonderful wife, and his autobiography, Left Wing, From Rank Rat to Student Radical. Yves, thank you so much for joining us on Canada Day, and I have to ask Yves, how's it going? How is Canada Day in Quebec? Are the Quebec nationalists all boycotting Canada Day?
I apologize everyone for being late. I just actually was at Canada Day festivities, and my 6-year-old really enjoyed the bouncy castles and the cupcakes and even the flags. I would have tried to stay away from that, but that is what it is. And so yeah, sorry for being a bit late, but he was really actually really enjoying it, and there were lots and lots of people there, obviously skewed towards immigrants, people with less income, and yeah, that's part of the whole propaganda kind of process.
So Yves, actually, and all of you guys can answer this. So Pita, you're saying to me that actually Canada Day, at least within the past couple of years, more people are actually demoralized and actually not even in the mood, especially immigrants that have lived in the country for many years, because of Canada's hard shift to fiscal conservatism, what people call neoliberalism. I prefer to call it Neo-Dickensianism. But Yves, you were just saying that so the propaganda system in Canada actually, so there's a lot of concerted efforts to get immigrant communities to actually be celebrating Canada Day because Canada has rolled out the red carpet for them, and they're gonna be well on their way to a wonderful bourgeois existence, maybe an affluent existence. So actually, yeah, can you talk a bit more about that?
The Canada Day celebrations in Montreal are I think a little bit different than elsewhere. They tend to skew very much. Yeah. They tend to skew towards immigrant communities. It becomes kind of a federalist. Obviously, Saint Jean Baptiste was the Fête Nationale du Québec happened a week ago. So that's sort of a more obviously sovereigntist kind of whatever celebration. And the best, maybe just to segue a little something a little different, the best Canada Day festivity I've ever been part of was in 2005 when Pierre Pettigrew, in his riding, he was the former Canada's foreign minister, and his riding, it was very Bloc Québécois or Liberal Party, and so the immigrant communities, South Asian primarily, this is up by a kind of Park Metro if people know Montreal. And we had about 70 people from the Haitian community. He comes to the park he's supposed to hand out hot dogs. This is obviously a year after the coup, a couple of weeks actually after I put fake blood on his hands at a press conference about his criminal role in Haiti. And he gets out of his vehicle, he walks towards the hot dog stand, and like 70 people from the Haitian community converge on him. It's just making tons of noise. And he's in the park for about 5 minutes, and he's like shuttled out of the park because the whole optic thing that he was trying to go for was like completely scuttled. But yeah, in Montreal specifically, there is a sort of dynamic on the federalist kind of, which sort of immigrant community, and also when it comes to like these festivities, obviously people who want free stuff tend to be poorer people, right? And that would also connect to sort of immigrant communities, and maybe sometimes kind of larger families and more things for children and stuff like that. But yeah, I think in recent years, of course, with the sort of attention devoted to the killings at so-called residential schools, that there's obviously the Canada Day kind of thing got put a bit on sort of the propaganda kind of wonderful Canada has been put on the back foot. But yeah.
The first question I asked Pizza and Tyler was when we talk about those protesting Canada Day, those who want to cancel Canada Day and have either an alternative holiday or just or no enforced patriotism day. I know you've often said this before, and is this still the case this year that the debate is okay? We that debate the debate is okay, protesting Canada Day because of past and current apartheid that's being inflicted on Indigenous people, but aren't those the limits to that debate? Because nobody will say we should be protesting Canada because it's a member of NATO. We should be protesting Canada because it's a member of the Five Eyes Alliance. We should be protesting Canada because hate to spoil it for you guys, but guys, Canada's never been a force for good in the world. Evil did not start with Stephen Harper and Justin Trudeau. Evil started as early as settler colonialism, with Canada overthrowing such and such a government during the Monroe Doctrine period, during the Cold War era. So are you still finding that that's a difficulty, that yes, we can protest, that yes, we're allowed to protest, we're even be invited on the CBC or Radio Canada to be saying we should not have this day because of the plight of Indigenous people, past and present, but we also should not be celebrating this day because because once upon a time we were a partner in crime to the British Empire. Now we're a partner in crime to the American Empire, or as I like to say, the Anglo-American pan-European empires. Your response to that?
Well, I mean, first of all, at these festivities at the Old Port that I just came from, there was an effort to incorporate Indigenous, quite a push to incorporate Indigenous kind of cultural stuff within it. But there was also the Canadian military was there. I actually got there a bit late, but the Canadian military was there, so they had a whole military element to it. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the goal. I mean, I've said this a number of places. You can now say on the CBC or on the pages of the Globe and Mail that Canada was, founded on dispossession of First Nations and genocidal. But you can't really say that Canada should withdraw from NATO, right? You can't say so. The range of debate on foreign policy is incredibly narrow, and mostly we're told that as Melanie Joly really said a couple of days ago, we have to have more Canadian influence in the world, and Canada's working hard to have more influence in the world. The reality, of course, is that Canada has far too much influence in the world. And if you believe in equality, the two most powerful countries in the world should, of course, be India and China, because they have the most people, and they have more than 4 times the number of people that the US has. And if you think about Canada's population, there's more people in Uganda, there's more than 4 times more people in Bangladesh. So Canada should have less power on the global sphere than Uganda, and a quarter of what Bangladesh has. That to say that in the mainstream of Canadian discussion is just that you're often like some other planet. But I think that if you really are genuinely nationalist and egalitarian minded, that's
Yeah, Youri, I wanted to jump in, on the question you asked us way back, and it worked really well the way the discussion came around back to Canada Day, and I agree with what Yves was just saying about the limits of what can and can't be said, and I think what's happening now with respect to things like Canada Day is that we're starting to see a more substantive split within the ruling class. Between the far right, who are deeply offended by the very minor rhetorical shifts that have taken place in the last 5 to 10 years, let's say. So to Yves' point, you will find in mainstream media discourse now references to colonialism, and sometimes even references to genocide or cultural genocide, depending on the publication. The far right is offended by that and are pushing back and are mobilizing to push back against that. Just in the last few weeks, we've seen Barbara Kay, Terry Glavin, even David fucking Frum denying the residential school, the realities of the unmarked graves at the residential schools, which of course is only one tiny piece of the horror of the residential school system. But it was one that got a lot of media attention a few years ago, kind of pushed the discourse a little bit wider open about colonialism. And now they're pushing back against that and denying it. So you have that sort of core of the far right in the ruling class who want to just go back to, let's celebrate the good Canadian boys who saved the world in World War I and saved us all in World War II. Every freedom you have comes back to that, and don't give me any of this stuff about the natives. I don't care. And then separately, you have the more traditional liberal ruling class. And that's where, Yves' point about the way they've incorporated some of the discourse, right? And they always do that. That's what they do, is they incorporate a small amount of the criticisms they receive, and then kind of appropriate it almost for themselves. So, your average Canadian liberal will talk about the horror of the residential school system and then somehow spin this thing around so that it becomes, but aren't we so lucky we live in a country where we can have an open conversation about the horrors of the past? I'm so glad to be in Canada, because if it was some other country, we wouldn't even be allowed to talk about it. So they managed to turn the horrific founding of Canada into a virtue because at least we can have a discussion about it in the present. It's extraordinarily manipulative. And I think in many ways that's the dominant form that Canada Day things take now. But there is also this reaction coming from the far right, who are ultimately so fucking stupid that they don't understand that Justin Trudeau is performing, right? They don't understand that liberals are performing a certain kind of consciousness about colonialism, a certain kind of awareness about, the plights that various marginalized communities in Canada face. They don't care. They're performing it strategically in strategic moments. And, in the case of Canada Day, performing a kind of concern for marginalized communities in order to then turn around and justify all kinds of aggressive acts in the rest of the world, right? Because, to sort of answer the way that the liberals would answer Yves' question about, well, why does Canada have such outsized power if it has such a small population? Liberals will say, well, that's because Canada is one of the most civilized, democratic, peaceful nations in the world. We can have conversation about the horrible things that happened in our past. We can talk about it openly. And that's why we deserve to be able to tell Haitians how they should run their government. We are absolutely entitled to tell people in Afghanistan what type of government they should have and how they should do things. So, I think Canada Day for liberals is an opportunity to weaponize their performance of being aware of the harm that Canada has done. So that's my sort of where I think the ruling class in Canada is at right now, and how, and how that shapes up and how that plays out over the next 5 to 10 years is anyone's guess, because I think the right is winning. I think the Trudeau liberal milieu is losing, and I don't have a horse in that race, but I certainly think it's going to be dicey.
And actually, again, and actually, we have, Tyler, you mentioned at least we can have honest debates, but at the same time, Pizza, you talked about how, talk about cancel culture. Dimitri Lascaris was canceled twice, and if in a democracy we can have, we can have, debates about where we should be spending our money, and we can have debates on how we even address the grievances of Indigenous people and how to deal with police brutality. When it comes to foreign policy, we can't we're not even allowed to have our own spaces to even talk about it, even though our audience that comes to an anti-war rally, our audience that comes to hear a Dimitri Lascaris speak about his trip to Russia, the point of view of Russia, and how we can find some kind of a just peace in Ukraine, people lose their sorry to curse, but people lose their fucking shits. And 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 you know, and I think that, and I think what astounds me about the pro NATO stand with stand with Ukraine crowd, and I even want to reject this whole notion of standing with Ukraine. No, it's standing with Western backed Ukraine. It's standing with client state Ukraine. It's standing with a particular. It's standing for Ukraine. That's only one part of the identity of Ukraine. Ukraine is much more complex than we all than these pro-war folks even want to give it credit for. So yeah, Yves, Yves, talk in general about how there is no room for an honest for an honest discussion, and that if you drop some overlooked or inconvenient truth bombs when it comes to the Ukraine-Russia NATO war, the attacks on those trying to give another narrative and proposal how to end this tragic, unnecessary conflict. It's like, again, I just find it's incredible how the NATO folks, how Team Canada, how the pivot to Asia folks, they have an abundance of platforms that they can just keep recycling their propaganda. They're half truths if you even want to concede that they have a fair point on such and such an issue. And again, I just find it's astounding how, when you have, the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, we always have 3 or 4 trolls, who's, disrupting the thing, or we have people who literally sabotage, your, Canadian Foreign Policy Hour, or like with Dimitri, 2 events closed down in one day, 1 event canceled and have to go to a bar. So I don't know.
I mean, the Dimitri stuff is this is new in my lifetime. Maybe the first Iraq War in the early '90s, or maybe former Yugoslavia. I wasn't paying enough attention politically at that point, but it's more akin to what I think took place during the Korean War in the 1950s. It's pretty remarkable, and it's amazing that Canada's not actually technically at war, right? I think it is sort of de facto at war, and the ideological climate very much treats it like we are at war, where any dissent. Now, I can understand somebody who's in the Ukraine, and in Ukraine saying basically, this is not a time for debate. There's not a time for discussion. We're at war. We're being attacked. We need to just sort of rally behind. I really don't get it 10,000 kilometers away in Canada. And so shutting down these discussions is remarkable. It's the whole political spectrum. Let's be clear. Big swaths to the left are very supportive of shutting down discussions that challenge the kind of one-sided narrative.
Yes. The NATO socialists, right?
Yeah. Well, some anarchists. There's all kinds of different segments of the left that are completely behind this sort of one-sided depiction of what's going on, and rightfully so at one level. Obviously, what Russia's done is contrary to international law and is brutal. But there is a whole series of policies that Canada has pursued beforehand and then since the invasion that are both provoked it and prolonging it. And it's an ideological, and it's also fascinating how that's also tied with regards to China and the shift towards this sort of following the U.S. empire on wrapping up conflict with China, even when there's big swaths of Canadian capital that are not on board for that, right? Some of the most kind of like nefarious forces in Canadian foreign policy, namely the whole mining world, does not want the conflict with China. They've been working with Chinese companies and making a bunch of money off of selling resources to China, and some of the most reactionary forces in traditionally Canadian foreign policy are actually, in my opinion, sort of more sensible on the China question. But yeah, what's happened with Dimitri, and he was shut down. They got his event canceled here in Montreal 2 days ago, and then they had to hold it in the park, and that's a pretty troubling development.
But Pizza, before I ask you about True to the Powerless, I just want to say, I don't know, when is the Canadian left ever going to fucking learn? I mean, this pathetic excuse of a left that Canada has, and not just the Canadian left, but it's Canada Day, it's all things Canada. So I'm specifically shitting on the Canadian left. I mean, in Afghanistan, Canada supported, along with the United States and Britain, the Mujahideen against okay, maybe they were aggressive in how they wanted to eradicate radical Islam, but we destroyed any chance of a secular, feminist, left-wing, you name it, in Afghanistan when Canada supported America and Britain and Saudi Arabia's exporting of the bin Ladens of the world, of the Talibans of the world, and the Muslim Brotherhoods into Afghanistan. Canada then in the invasion of Afghanistan after 9/11, we weren't supporting good people in Afghanistan. We were supporting rival Islamists. We were supporting people who were human traffickers who like to have little boys dancing for them. I'll leave everybody's imagination as to what else they did with that. And you can read everything from WikiLeaks to even New York Times shows that the U.S. and their allies engaged in systemic war crimes. And then Canada, when it comes to and it doesn't, yes, let's talk about Ukraine. Let's not be intimidated and actually talk about what's really going on in Ukraine. Canada is not supporting some mild liberal reformists in Ukraine. We're supporting rival oligarchs. We're supporting reactionary movements who lionize Nazi war criminals and Nazi collaborators. And while we're supporting Ukraine and giving into some of the demands of flooding that country with weapons, Zelensky is on a privatization killing spree in that country. And in Russia, we're not supporting the good guys in Russia. We're supporting Navalny, who's also a rival oligarch, who's also a queer phobe, who's also an Islamophobe, who's also like a misogynist, you name it. And the left just never ever learns. And it's not like they even have to do their own investigation to double check on that. There's enough American leftists and anti-imperialist groups which are showing the world what Canada is really doing, along with its friends, America, and its friends in NATO. And actually, Pitts, I want your reaction, and then Eve and Tyler can respond before I ask a specific question about your documentary.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with everything you've said, Youri. Especially the so-called left, their support for the war in Ukraine, the Western-backed war in Ukraine is particularly troubling. And going back to this is really the legacy of NATO expansionism, the current stage of global conflict. NATO, there was a deal reached during the end of the Cold War between George H.W. Bush and Gorbachev that NATO would not expand 1 inch to the east in return for a unified Germany, which was an enormous concession on Gorbachev's front, considering the fact that with the two world wars, Russia was just paid an enormous price at the hands of the German aggressors. So that was an enormous concession. And of course, Bill Clinton comes into office and totally disregards that and moves continues to expand NATO eastward. And now NATO's right up on Russia's border. And since that time, NATO with Canadian support, has gone into Afghanistan and totally ignored voices, moderate voices in Afghanistan, like Abdul Haq, who was saying you need to stop bombing Afghanistan. If you bomb Afghanistan, you're preventing our efforts from within to get rid of the Taliban and to facilitate some sort of democratic transition, where the people can have a certain semblance of rights, where women can live in some form of dignity. So Abdul Haq was totally opposed to the bombing. Yet Canada was a full NATO partner. We didn't take part in the aerial bombing, but we had our troops deployed in Kandahar, and we just committed atrocities. And then in Libya, we took a full-on frontal support, and of course that was backed by the left. Were very much silent on that as well. Even like the Green Party of Elizabeth May, there's some misleading notion that
Narratives.
she was against, misleading narratives that she was against the war, but she wasn't. And the NDP, of course, backed it as well. That's the NDP is kind of looked at as the Bernie Sanders equivalent here in Canada, but well, Bernie Sanders also has a very pro-war record, so maybe there's some truth to that. But really, of all these NATO imperialists, Afghanistan in 1999, in the NATO bombing of Kosovo, Libya, Canada, the left were very much silent and were full supporters, and that has led to the current stage, which is NATO's legacy, which is Canada supporting Ukraine, exacerbating the current Russian invasion, which is really the main victims are Ukrainian lives, but also it brings us to the brink of nuclear war. The more we keep providing arms, the more we keep sabotaging, rejecting any efforts for a diplomatic settlement, it increases the risk of nuclear war. And we're the peace voices. We're the ones saying, we're not supporting Russia. We're not saying, oh, Russia's great. We condemn Russia wholeheartedly. We're the peace voices. Yet it's voices like Dimitri, it's voices like Yves and Tyler that are being attacked and being vilified. But we're the peace voices, But it's just been in history. There's just been a trend, and you can go back to Eugene Debs and even Rosa Luxemburg, where the peace voices are the ones that are vilified so much, and even by the so-called left. So I'll just leave it at that.
I think I'd want to push back just a little bit about the left, or at least I'd want to just maybe get some clarity on who we mean. Like Pitasanna, I agree with you wholeheartedly in your criticism of the Green Party and the NDP, right? I mean, yeah, to your point, people call think of the NDP as being sort of like Bernie Sanders. On most domestic issues, they're far to the right of Bernie Sanders. But given that Bernie is actually not all that solid on foreign policy, it is a bit
exactly.
of a closer
Bernie's also a NATO socialist. He's also a pivot to Asia man, and the guy doesn't even defend democratic socialists who are under attack by the U.S. empire. Well, anyway, so yeah, continue with what you're saying, Tyler.
But yeah, I want to distinguish, that from the more organic left that, look, the Canadian left is weak, and it's particularly weak right now. Since about 2015, I've watched the Canadian left really kind of disintegrate. A lot of the organizations of the Canadian left, have disintegrated. And there have been moments where it seemed like there was some recomposition happening, but then those have disintegrated. So, I mean, the Canadian left is in a rough position right now. But I don't think it's fair to say, where was the left, during the war in Afghanistan? The left didn't support. The organic left in Canada didn't support the invasion of Afghanistan. I, was there for many protests against the war in Afghanistan, organized a few of them. And I do think I want to put that out there only because it's a really dicey moment. We're in a really, really dangerous moment in the 2020s, and the right is truly gathering its strength and growing. And I think if ever there has been a time where we on the left need to build united fronts, which doesn't mean papering over differences, it doesn't mean ignoring mistakes or problems, but like I do think it does mean a certain generosity of spirit. Like now is the time. And so I don't include the NDP in that. So in that sense, Pita, we don't disagree, because
certainly not the NDP Socialist Caucus, certainly not Socialist Action Canada. These are NDP members who are trying to make the NDP into a true, socialist revolutionary party at home and anti-imperialist party abroad. But the problem,
I do. Sorry, I to just address Tyler's point, I do agree that the organic left was against the war in Afghanistan. Was speaking out a lot about even the NATO war in Libya and even the NATO bombing of Kosovo. But when we think of the left, the mainstream conception is the NDP, the Green Party. So my answer was very much in the context of that. But the organic.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with Afghanistan. I think that we have to be clear that Sven Robinson represents the absolute left of official NDP, and he was the foreign affairs critic during the bombing of Yugoslavia, and he supported it until about a month in, and then decided that he had sort of been hoodwinked. I don't think the left really opposed Libya. There were some left voices that opposed Libya. The NDP very much just like cheer-led, and the press release that they put out after Gaddafi was killed is actually beyond belief. I think that today, the left does big chunks of left, from, like I said, from anarchists to people, not many like organizations. I agree with you, Tyler, that there's, very few really sort of like leftist organizations. But if to the extent that there are, like the media outlets, right, like take Canadian Dimension. Canadian Dimension has clearly published a lot of critical stuff about Canada's role in the NATO proxy war in Ukraine, but they also publish things that are just like pretty. I don't even understand why they would do it, because you can read it in the Globe and Mail, you can read it in National Post, you can see it on the CBC. So they haven't even sort of like come around to saying like, okay, like we don't really need to be a platform for more of the sort of Putin is the devil kind of perspective. Same thing with like rabble. I'm not sure about Spring. I think Spring has been a bit more what I would call consistent.
It can be rabble. It could be Ricochet. It could be any of these Canadian Canadian outlets, which they're great on on addressing the issue of settler colonialism, and they'll give space to police abolitionists, and I know, and that's me. That's pretty radical. I mean, it's one thing to be like a police reformist, demilitarized police, let's end the drug war, but abolishing the police. So there's even space. So there's even space for that. But when it comes to Canadian imperialism, I have to say, I'm always disappointed, and because I mean, because let's get to this question that I want to ask Pitts, and I would love both of your response to that, which is, Pitts, talk about the latest responses about the still ongoing shunning and lack of engagement on the part of left-leaning outlets to your docuseries on the history of Canadian imperialism, and what can you or viewers, what can any of us even do to try to continue to get folks to see this film? The Canadian press, and I'm talking about the Canadian nonprofit left-leaning indie press, to cover it. But the big question is, why do you think there is this response of shunning this film? And do you think if your film was a 6-part docuseries on the plight of Indigenous Canadians, Black Canadians, and the growing Black Lives Matter here, or queer people, or even about police brutality, in which you editorially advocate abolishing the police, do you think the response would be radically different than this 6-part docuseries where you smash, where you speak out on Canadian imperialism, past and present. Your response, and then Tyler's response, and then Yves' response.
Yeah, thank you, Youri, for the question. So, I mean, our docuseries, "Truth to the Powerless," of which I'm very grateful that Yves and Tyler were both a part of, and their contributions were phenomenal. So,
and Richard Sanders and Dimitri, both of
that's right.
Both of who I wish could be on the program today, but we'll have to do another candidate with them another time.
That's right, and all of their contributions were phenomenal. And the docuseries is unique in the sense that it's really the first docuseries on foreign policy on Canadian foreign policy that interviews and gets the opinions and voices of the politicians, the diplomats, those that formulated, spearheaded, championed Canada's foreign policy. We interview them. We get the establishment narrative, and then we also interview academics and dissidents like Tyler, like Yves, who challenge that narrative. So in that sense, our docuseries, myself, and when I say our, I mean myself and my project partner Ryan Ellis was very much responsible for like the technical side of it. He was also very important. Our docuseries brought something what we felt was very much needed and rare to the progressive anti-militarist discourse on Canadian foreign policy. So it is a little disheartening to see that we haven't been getting as much coverage as we would have liked within the so-called Canadian left media. I'm very fortunate that I should shout out the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute was very humble and gracious, and that's also I think thanks to Yves as well for having a panel discussion of our docuseries where Tyler and Richard Sanders were there as well, including myself. So that was great, but it is disheartening. I mean, it's hard for me to. I don't really want to. I don't know if it's my place to really speculate as to why that's happening. But that's disheartening to see. But certainly we are, trying as much as possible to put the word out there for the docuseries.
It seems as if if white multiracial Canada tells the truth about foreign policy for one day, its whole world falls apart. Tyler, what's your response? And then Yves, what's your response to the question I posed to Petsa?
I mean, I think if I'm to be totally honest, Youri, I don't know if I like the question that you posed. I think there's probably a lot of reasons why the docuseries hasn't gotten the coverage it deserves. It is great. It's excellent. It's really great work, Pita, and and I was glad to be a part of it. And I think it does deserve a lot of coverage. I don't know. Yeah, I agree with the way Pita answered by saying like that there's no value in speculating. Well, what if it was about
this is the polite Canadianness that's coming out of you.
No, it's not. It's not. It's not. It's what it is a deep concern about the siloing and parceling out of sections of the left. That's part of the problem right now, is that the left has disintegrated, and there are so few organizations that are functional, and so few ways in which we can be brought together. Our May Day marches are pathetic. I used to have all kinds of criticisms about some of the ways that our May Day marches played out and the different fights between the different groups, but I mean, they barely even exist to a certain extent now. And so I just don't think the concern here should be, fighting over which piece of the struggle is getting attention or getting too much attention or not enough attention. We have to fight on so many fronts. We are
but look, I don't look
in so many ways. And so, for me, I think the thing to do is to really try to just keep pushing on all fronts, right? Just keep trying. I mean, if there's a 6-part docuseries about the Black Lives Matter movement, get it out there. Let's push it.
That being said, Tyler, I welcome a documentary on all those subjects. I even do a YouTube show where we talk about all those subjects. My problem is, why can't the Canadian left chew gum and walk at the same time? The Canadian left, I'm sorry, and I am sorry to be harsh, but I am very, just pissed off on the state of affairs when it comes to anti-imperialism. The Canadian left does this. They'll speak out nonstop about evil mining companies who dispossess Indigenous people. The Canadian left will do nationwide protests against police brutality, and thank God they do that. And then we have like environmental groups that speak out to a degree that they're even willing to speak out on Canadian. But anyways, but we do have Canadian environmentalism that speaks out on Canada's not being a climate change action leader. And yet, when it comes to when I pose the question sometimes to Canadian leftists, why isn't Black Lives Matter speaking out about abolishing the Canadian military or Canada's Secret Service? Why aren't more Indigenous groups or more queer organizations speaking out on, again, the Canadian military, the Canadian Secret Service, which is the police on steroids, and this bizarre thing that we'll criticize what the mining companies do to our Indigenous people, but we won't criticize the mining companies that are trying to overthrow Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela or whatever Latin American left-leaning country, which is going with, I mean, that's anti-Indigenous. That's the Canadian police, and that's settler colonial, and Canadian imperialism is settler colonialism on steroids. It's the Canadian police on steroids, and the response is often, there's so much. Look, we have so much stuff that we're dealing with in Canada that some of us just don't have the headspace to speak out on Canadian imperialism. I think that's a pathetic excuse, given that the Americans, who everybody likes to think that they're much better than the Americans on this and that. Come on, the American left knows how to chew gum and walk at the same time. They'll speak out about apartheid in their country and the apartheid America inflicts on the rest of the world. And there are and those voices, the Noam Chomskys of the world, whatever criticism I even have of Professor Chomsky, but those voices, the Chomskys, the Michael Parentis, even outlets like the Grey Zone, Minpress News, they're huge. Whereas in Canada, the only like anti-imperialist outlets I can think of is the Canada Files, and there are peace organizations, but and there are peace organizations. There is the Canadian Peace Congress, and yet all these Canadian left-wing outlets don't even seek those voices out to talk about what Canada is really doing in the world. So, yeah. Do you want to respond to that, Siren? Anyone else?
I'll jump in there. In that, like I get Tyler's point. I do agree that with things so kind of like weak, that you can sort of shit on left-wing groups, and that just kind of contributes to the sort of lack of any real organizing taking place. Having said that, I actually do kind of want a couple of different points. One, I'm not concerned about the far right. That's not my primary political concern. I think we've had a liberal government now for 9 years. And so to me, like, worrying about the far right, I'm, a group like Anti-Hate Canada, that's all about like focusing on the far right while they're getting money from, BMO and the liberal government. Like, I find some of that overemphasis on the far right becomes a way to just justify the neoliberal kind of status quo. So some of that, I don't agree with that at a macro picture kind of political level. But I do, and also within that, another point I think is important is that the reality, and when to what Youri is saying, is that like there's a lot of leftists who want to shut Dimitri Lascaris down. Like they want to shut our events down. And like there's a whole bunch of people on Twitter that spend their time like I'm the tanky, Yves is a Putin tanky, and like leftist people who are like this and that, like trying to ban me from the anarchist book fair, and like it's pretty wild, right? So when people point out that like these like leftists are going along with NATO, and they're not just going along with NATO, they're also going along like I'm all about Black Lives Matters, but I've never mentioned the core group ruling Haiti, and like you got like 6 white guys in a room telling the 12 million Black Haitians like what's going to happen, and like as if that's not like a crass form of racism. So I think that like some of that stuff needs to be part of the thinking in some of this stuff. But the big picture level, this is the big picture, and that the more I'm increasingly of the opinion that this NATO proxy war specifically, but also the China stuff, it's not just like, you know, it's sabotaging housing rights groups. It's sabotaging environmental groups. It's sabotaging minimum wage campaigns. It's sabotaging the left in general. Leftists who have got on board with NATO and have got on board with this very odd form of Canadian nationalism, which is this weird, like Ukrainian Canadian nationalism, like, and then it's also this sort of Canadian nationalism vis-a-vis China as well. But they got on board with these like this, like basically brought on board with militarists, NATO, whatever. They are undermining the ability to challenge the domestic issues that, you know, they mostly care about, they mostly focus on. So I think that like this stuff is absolutely like if we are going to put geopolitics aside, like the environmental movement, right? The environmental movement early on, and you just saw the Greta Thunberg meeting with Zelensky a couple days ago. Early on, you had the 350 guy there, well-known Vermont. Bill McKibben going on Democracy Now! And like this is all about how we have to get off of fossil fuels because it's the oil. He was giving sort of this like environmental spin to an anti-Putin thing, and it's the oil that's allowing Putin to invade, and like these kind of arguments, which is basically just giving geopolitics was just in the hands of the ruling class, in the hands of the arms industry funded think tanks, and we were just going to give, like, you know, we're going to go along with that. That's I think absolutely devastating for the left. It's devastating for the left, again, for you know, fighting against, you know, rent evictions, housing rights, to ecological questions, and so I agree that we have to be careful with the formulation as just being like more shit on these like small kind of not barely, you know, fledgling groups, and it's just piling on difficulties onto already, you know, very difficult situations. So I hear that point, but I do also think we need to be a little bit clear in some of the sort of big picture kind of political dynamics that are at play in this. But
and for God's sakes, like and you know, as I mentioned, the Canadian military, that's the police on steroids that these Canadian leftists say that we need to abolish. The Canadian Secret Service, that is you know, that is the police on steroids. And if you're an environmentalist, you can do elementary environmental research in how militarism is one of the leading forces for why the planet is dying. We cannot support any form of militarism, whether it's NATO, whether it's the Five Eyes Alliance, or whether it's the Canadian military. And yet, you know, the responses sometimes of folks when you confront them is it's just bizarre. I mean, their response is first of all, they support, you know, Team Canada. They support what Team Canada does overseas. And, you know, you're a tanky, you're a Putinist, and you're in love with the Chinese government and stuff like that. Or the response is, or the response is a bit of a finger wagging and, look, I don't have time to deal with what Canada does overseas. I'm only going to deal with what Canada does within its own borders. Or the most shocking response is just the silence. The silence is deafening on how even the best of the Canadian left does not even want to speak out on what Canada does overseas. And for me, it's just like, what kind of a left is that? And again, in Britain, there are in Britain, however imperfect the situation is there, but there are people there that do chew gum and walk at the same time. In America, there are people there who do chew gum and walk at the same time. Even in Australia, whose white supremacy, settler colonialism, and propaganda is in some ways even more vile and grotesque than what happens in Canada. But even the Australian left there at times knows how to chew gum and walk at the same time. Whereas in Canada, hardly hardly anyone wants to cover Pita's documentary series. It's World Beyond War. It's Press News. It's me with my small program, or or the CFPI that's that's hosting an event. Whereas everyone else, it's like, oh no, yeah, we'll get back to you another time about, or oh no, sorry, I can't cover this. Got too much going on. Like what the flying F, man?
Yeah, I mean, look, the last thing I'll say on this is like I can understand where some of the frustrations come in, but and look, I get accused of being a tanky all the time, and I'm probably, of the four of us, the least sympathetic to Putin and Russia, and even the criticisms I have made have had me accused, called up as a tanky and told that I'm Putin's mouthpiece and all of these things. I mean, I've been critical of Putin for my entire adult life. It didn't just start, I always was. I posted a thing today about the way that wealth in Russia concentrated in the hands of a handful of people, basically the moment that the Soviet Union fell. I've been on that for so long, and even still I get accused, and yeah, sometimes by people who present themselves as being on the left, of being some kind of mouthpiece for Putin. But I've also, had the experience of, there's still a lot of small left organizations that are trying to build some kind of counter consensus, trying to continue to do, all the work that you mentioned, Yves. And I agree. There's a way in which and I think this is true of all militaristic projects. Militaristic, nationalistic projects can divert people's energy and attention away from struggles against their own state in a range of different areas. I mean, this is what happened in the First World War. And most of the left in the First World War failed, right? I mean, we remember people like Rosa Luxemburg because they were among the few that continued to say, like, no nation but the working class. Like, the working class has no nation, no war but class war. And that is my position with respect to the conflict in Ukraine. The people that are suffering are working class people. And we ought not to have a horse in that race. I don't know much about what Dimitri's thing was. And I probably have some doubts and some concerns about what Dimitri's visits in Russia were all about. But here's the thing, the canceling of those events reminds me of, and Yves, you already mentioned the Korean War. It reminds me of the cancellation of peace events during the Korean War. So in the 1950s, there were people who tried to oppose in some ways a similar kind of situation, and argued that no one was benefiting from the conflict in Korea. That North Korea was being devastated for no good reason, and that the Canadian military was out there using chemical weapons, for instance, testing out chemical weapons against Korean civilians, all of which was true. And people like John Endicott would come to Canada and try to hold events to speak to these realities, and those events were being shut down. They were being covered by magazines like Maclean's, which called Dr. Endicott. The headline was "Dr. Endicott fronts for the Reds," and it was this way of what's the word, like delegitimizing any kind of anti-war position by simply saying, "Oh no, he's just working for the Reds." And I think that is what is being done with respect to this conflict in Ukraine. All they have to say is, "This guy's just doing propaganda for Putin." and then everyone is allowed to stop listening because, oh well, if he's just doing propaganda for Putin, then I don't need to listen to that shit. And that's doing enormous harm. And I agree. There are elements of the left that have contributed to that.
But at the same time, this is also what stuns me though about Canada's left is I'm gonna be a betting man and say that Noam Chomsky is quite popular amongst the Canadian left, right? Or okay, so if Noam Chomsky is popular amongst the Canadian left, and you say to the Canadian and you say to a Canadian audience that Canada has been a partner in crime to this evil empire, the American Empire, and you can even go back that Canada has been a partner in crime to the British Empire, if we want to talk about and this is how you talk about settler colonialism and just trying and then just trying to explain to people what Canada's real role in the world. You know, I mean, you don't have to even look at Truth to the Powerless. You don't even have to read Yves' book. You don't even have to read your book, Tyler. If you just do elementary research into Canada, look at declassified documents or spend your time on your version of C-SPAN and look at how Canadian politicians are openly talking about how we're going to sanction this country, how we're going to try to overthrow that country. Like, you just have to do that, and you know that Canada is not a force for good in the world. And then on top of that, I mean, how much of a nervous breakdown can people have? You just have to edit like a bunch of history books and go, yeah, Canada also overthrew, Salvador Allende. Yeah, Canada also played a part in overthrowing Jacobo Arbenz and stuff like that. Like, why like this? Like, why are even like Canadian leftists fighting tooth and nail to to censor this truth on Canada and not even have like a proper like engagement when it comes to international when it comes to international affairs? Eve, I'm curious your response, and then Pitasanna and Tyler again.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think, like I said, I think that the left has lost. If I heard the question correctly, I think the left is made a big mistake by leaving the geopolitics of the Ukraine question in the hands of the militarists and the elites. And yeah. I actually put myself into that. I've said this a few times that I myself, I wrote a little bit in the Black Book. I wrote a little bit in the Harper book, a little bit in Trudeau, but I actually didn't follow sort of Eastern Europe and NATO expansion and the ouster of Yanukovych in 2014 and Canada's role. And I didn't really follow it very closely. And I know there were people who were following that closely. And I'm a little embarrassed that I didn't really sort of kind of delve into it seriously until, just before Russia's invasion. And that what should have been done is we should have been, stopping our side contributing to this rising tension. And we didn't do that. And that rising tension was responded to by, these very militaristic, nationalistic people who run Russia to, do like they responded to our militaristic, kind of NATO expansion policies by their version of that. And it's led to this really terrible thing, not just for people in Ukraine, but obviously all those who've been affected by the conflict in Africa in terms of Arab world in terms of increasing. But I would like to believe that people get some like lesson from this, and that people are coming around on some of these questions. I mean, people on the left. I'm unfortunately a little bit doubtful that that's happening to the extent that I would certainly like to see. But I don't know. I think you got to go into like some of the kind of core questions of nationalism and the power of living at the imperial center. This view that we have benefited from the global order, and I think that a lot of people, I think that Even earlier on there's sort of discussion I was about sort of some of the stuff on like Canada Day and like immigrant communities. One of the things that came up, and I've written about this a little bit and thought about this a bit, how like Canada is able to mobilize immigrant communities for its imperialism, or for that matter, First Nations. Right? There's a whole thing, like the Canadian military in recent years has done an incredible job in mobilizing we treated our great Indigenous snipers during World War I poorly, and they were great, and you'll have these Indigenous organizations that like frame World War I as this fight for all the good stuff of the world. I mean, so the ability to sort of mobilize so much of kind of like, using the Haitian community as the justification for terrorizing Haitians. That is a common thing in our kind of media landscape, that, we have this big Haitian diaspora, and therefore now it's not actually what's going on. And they're using the certain elements of the Haitian community and all this kind of stuff. Right. But how some of those dynamics play out are really quite startling. And so it makes sense that, quite honestly, that someone who was focused on Black Lives Matter kind of mobilization would be very hesitant to start getting involved in attacking Canada's role in Haiti, when a lot of the faces that Canada is putting forward for its role in Haiti are, defined as Black Haitian Montrealers or Black Haitian Canadians and stuff like that. So all of those kind of dynamics, play out and shape these dynamics. And I don't know, what you do, but just kind of keep slogging away at some of these questions in terms of shifting that. But
one response to that, Pita and then Tyler.
One of the reasons why Ryan and I made this docuseries, Truth to the Powerless, is because we wanted it. We wanted to target everyday Canadians that are just working class Canadians, working 40 hours a week, who feel like what they've been told about what their government does, it's not entirely the truth, and they feel that there's something sinister going on, but they don't have the time to really look into the declassified documents or read, Tyler and Yves' magnificent publications, but are curious and want to know. So we created this docuseries so that it kind of addresses like fundamental issues, like Canada's support for fascism in the lead up to World War II, Canada's support for Hitler, Canada's support for NATO, Canada's support for suppressing Indigenous struggles during the Cold War, Canada's support for apartheid South Africa, Canada's support for apartheid Israel, Canada's support for overthrowing Gaddafi, Canada's support for the NATO intervention in Afghanistan, Canada's support for Indonesia's intervention in East Timor. That's probably one of the worst crimes Canada has ever committed in post-World War II history relative to population. It's the worst. Indonesia's invasion and occupation of East Timor is the worst atrocity relative to population. So really, educating just everyday Canadians about, this is what our government is doing, and this is how you can, you can really mobilize and join thinkers like Yves and Tyler, who are really working to dismantle the neoliberal system that very much continues to perpetuate these kinds of atrocities. So that was really why we created this, docuseries, Truth to the Powerless. And for me, it was I identify myself as somebody of the left when I was younger, but I didn't have the education system. Despite me identifying as somebody who's the left, the education system, I feel, had failed me because it didn't teach me about Canada's support for fascism, Canada's support for Hitler, it didn't teach me about Canada's support for apartheid, South Africa. It didn't teach me all of these things. I it was by accident that I had stumbled on the work of Yves Engler. I had stumbled on an article that he had written about Lester B. Pearson. Lester B. Pearson's a war criminal, and that kind of got me curious. And then I got exposed to the Black Book of Canadian Foreign Policy, and that was very much instrumental in kind of shaping and really allowing me to look at Canada's foreign policy through a different lens. I had been aware of U.S. foreign policy and U.S. atrocities because it's the superpower, it's the center of the world, and there's so much focus on that. So I think going to a question about the Canadian left, even those who I want to broaden the question to just say even those who are like me, who are youngsters like 16, 17, who had identified as left, but they didn't really know how to articulate that. That's what I felt, by creating this docuseries. That's what Ryan and I wanted to do. We wanted to educate those who had felt like they identified as the left, didn't know exactly how to articulate their grievances or what they felt. And we felt this docuseries would act as a primer to educate them and to become involved in mobilizing and activism.
Tyler?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, like what we need to be always sort of doing is staying away from nationalism, staying away from patriotism of any kind. Even as easy as it can be, it can seem like such an easy. You can play to the crowd so easily. You want to try to mobilize for something. I don't know, fight against big oil. And so you do that by saying, no, as Canadians, we've got values that are, and right,
Yeah.
it's just poison. It's just absolute poison to couch anything in nationalistic or patriotic sort of terms. And I think to the extent that that the left is in a rough scene right now, part of that is like the dividends of falling into and slipping and sliding into nationalist narratives and nationalist discourses. We have to be Marxists about this. We have to do class struggle and class analysis. At the end of the day, my nation is the working class. That is my community. That's my people. And we're not going to convince the people who benefit from Canadian nationalism. We're not going to convince them. We're not going to change their mind. They know what they're doing. They know what they want. They know what their goals are. What we need to do are talk to other working class people and try to expose, I think, the manipulations that Yves was talking about earlier. The ways in which liberal Canada will try to hoodwink us by having people of marginalized identities be the purveyors
The
of
weaponized immigrant that Yasha Levine has talked about. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have to just stop being hoodwinked by this. We have to stop being sucked in by liberal nonsense about listen to Indigenous voices, right? And it's like, well, look, not all Indigenous people agree. The two people who were most implicated in the torture of Shadane Aron in Somalia in 1993 were Indigenous. And that's a complicated piece of history to unpack. But it is a fact. It is a fact that, people get implicated into the nationalist project, and then they do harm on behalf of, the settler colonial nation that is Canada. And so, I think we just have to try to keep focused on these fundamental things and not get sort of sucked into liberal identity politics, and the ways in which liberals manipulate us with that.
Superficial liberal identity politics, the obsession. Yeah.
Exactly.
Not the. No, anyways, I know what you mean, Tyler. I know what you mean.
Yeah. And just the ways in which we get manipulated, right? The ways that we get turned around so that I think the example Yves gave was a very good one, so that you can imagine that somehow what Canada's doing for Haiti is good just because it was a Black voice that said that Canada's doing good in Haiti, when in fact Canada's doing enormous harm to Black people in Haiti. And that you can lose that if you aren't constantly remembering to do class analysis, to understand things in that way. So yeah, I think that's where I would leave it.
Three final things before as we wrap up this conversation is I'll make one last little complaint though about the left, which is the following. You think the reason why it seems to be this huge monumental task to get the Canadian left to join the anti-imperialist movement, the Canadian truth-telling, myth-busting movements when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to Canada's foreign policy, is because so much of the Canadian left is actually implicated in supporting these unjust imperial wars. And then if it's not, the unions that, some who support the Liberal Party, some who support the NDP, who just go along when it comes to foreign policy. And of course, Canada, the Nordic countries, France, Western Europe, and so forth, their working class and middle class have benefited greatly from exploiting Africa, Haiti, Latin America, and so forth. So if they're not just dumb about foreign policy, they know that their government plays a role in the world, but they just purposely, but they're just being stupid on purpose because of the benefits of that come with imperialism sometimes. So there's that, and then of course there is the NGO world, and then the few leftists who do follow Canadian foreign policy. I assume they're watching some outlets like an Al Jazeera or or whatever, or DW or France 24, the English ones. And I'm pretty sure when they watch, well, when they're watching whatever, it could be Ukraine, it could be Syria, it could be the war for oil in Venezuela and stuff like that. I'm sure they probably are thinking, well, if Canada is doing good in those countries, if NATO is doing good in those countries, if China is a threat that must be contained, hey, I get it from watching these left-leaning outlets and so forth. And of course, our friends, in the US and Britain have also had that problem of having to confront fellow leftists who are simply reading the wrong outlet when it comes to, the imperial project of Assyria or NATO or the pivot to Asia or any place where imperialism rings its ugly head. I'm curious your responses, Yves, Tyler, and then Petsa on this.
Well, that's a really big question, actually, when you sort of try to delve into it. I mean, I think the NGOs, obviously, all different elements are, interacting with each other and reinforcing. And the Canadian NGOs have a whole, and when I say NGO, I mean actually government-funded, internationally focused kind of group, right?
Semi-NGOs.
They have their whole own internal dynamic, and there's a whole political history there that, of course, has been well documented by Drew Ojoje and Nick Berry-Shaw in their book. And that is important. That's relevant. There is also, a whole history around unions and foreign policy questions, which is, also important. I think there are political economy elements. I think if you're going to give one simple explanation to the question, the fact that it's not appearing on the CBC or in the Toronto Star, right? If the CBC and the Toronto Stars tomorrow started saying Canada was part of the core group, which is this racist organization in Haiti, then you would find that there are lots of voices in Canada prepared to say Canada's part of a core group in Haiti that's a racist organization, right? Like, so, but there's one explanation. It's that, but I think that you have to bring all of these elements together, and I do think there is like one of the elements you've hinted at, and it's a tricky one, but I think there is just straight sort of political cowardice, which is that there are people who understand that there is a really big problem with Canadian foreign policy, but they understand that that's going to marginalize. They're going to be marginalized by taking on those questions. There's a political economy. There's no jobs in this. There are jobs. Like I worked as a union staffer for 2.5 years, and honestly, the pay that I got was like equivalent to all of the anti-war groups in the country's entire budget, right? And there was like the CEP and then the Unifor, which the union became, they have like 100, 200 of these staffers, like they have like hundreds and hundreds, and unions in total have thousands of these. So there's political economy, and the same thing with the green movement. There's money around in environmental kind of world, and some of the anti-racism kind of world has some money. So there's a whole bunch of elements that sort of explain that, the why in that, but it's yeah. So
Tyler and then Pizza.
Yeah, I would just add to it that there's also deep historical roots to that. Settler colonialism is a particular type of, it creates a particular type of working class, and that is one that is deeply implicated in colonialism. I did the first lesson of a course that I'm doing on Canada in the world, and there's over 500 people in the course. There's a lot of people interested in it, but where I start is by just locating my own one set of my own ancestors who come to and settle in Manitoba immediately after the land is violently stolen. I mean, within a few years of the crushing of the rebellion at Red River, my ancestors take up a piece of land there, and they were working class people escaping capitalism in England. They're escaping poverty and shit work in factories and foundries in England. And they come to Canada on the promise that they will get their independence back, independence that they'd only really lost, over a couple of generations. As capitalism is imposed on people, they lose access to the land. They're no longer independent. They become wage laborers in these factories, and life goes to shit. They come to Canada or other settler colonies on the idea that this is going to be their opportunity to get away from that misery. And so they're deeply emotionally and materially implicated in getting Indigenous people off the land, because that's going to be their land. And so right from the start in a settler colony like Canada, the ruling class is pitting a particular type of settler against Indigenous people. And that's part of the deep DNA of this country, is a working class that comes out of settlement and comes from that settler experience, and therefore, always understood their material interests to be served by, participating in colonialism, supporting the nation. And so that's there. And then historically it plays out across all of these different moments along the way. And, Yves, you mentioned the unions, like that's a great example. You can look to the unions in the 1950s that support the overthrow of Jacobo Arbenz in Guatemala, because it's going to be good for the unions, and the unions are implicated in, the wealth that's going to be generated by overthrowing the Guatemalan government. Like, it's just one example, but you find them peppered through Canadian history, where unions and other settler organizations support colonialism and imperialism abroad. So in addition to those other things, like there is also that deep history there, and it's hard to overcome, and it's also hard to trace exactly how that happens. I mean, it's not like every person wandering through Oshawa right now is thinking about their relationship to the land 100 years earlier, right? But I mean, the ideology does still pass through. It does still pass down through generations. Certain ways in which it comes through, they manifest. Certainly, the racism and so on manifest in part because of that initial material drive to take the land. So that would be my additional point there.
Petsa?
I feel that Yves and Tyler articulated so wonderfully. I think what it's generally been is a coalescing of the political forces, the media forces, the NGOs. Now, for our docuseries, I interviewed Paul J, who was what a CBC program called Counterspin, and he was discussing really the coalescing of the media and the prime minister. The prime minister appoints the head of the CBC, so obviously the CBC is going to cater to the political whims of the prime minister's agenda.
That's funny. I thought the CBC wasn't Canadian state affiliated media like RT, Press TV, Al Jazeera.
That's what they want you to think. And we see the coalescing of the NGOs. In our docuseries, Richard Sanders talks about how these NGOs supposedly these democratic champions are going into Haiti, and they're doing everything they can to really dismantle any sort of democratic infrastructure that had been set up by the Lavalas, the democratic elected Lavalas party. So it's really these coalescing of these political NGOs, the media, and even the corporations as well. It was we also talk about in our docuseries how the Ontario government, the Ontario companies were very much supportive of apartheid South Africa because that was a cheap labor force. So it's really a coalescing of all these factors. I mean, one thing I can say, if I can speak personally, from my personal view, as far as looking into left-wing activism, I don't want to veer too far from your question, but my personal outlook is I'm somebody who had a very elite education. I'm a graduate of the Monk School. I have a degree in global affairs from the Monk School. So I remember, being a student at the Monk School, we were told I was told by one of my colleagues, a student, don't organize. I was part of a club at the Monk School, and they told me don't organize any events that will attract activists or protesters. So we were told that at the outset. One of the golden rules is you don't shit on Peter Monk, you don't shit on Bear Gold, because that's the hand that feeds you. And one of the professors at the time that I was a student at the Monk School was Bill Graham. And when I was interviewing Bill Graham for my docuseries, he was my professor at the time. So I was grilling him extensively on Haiti, on what he was doing in Haiti. And I don't want to go on too much of a tangent, but we had been trying for a really long time to get an interview with Bill Graham, and he had been in ill health for a long time, and I figured that this is the last chance that I have to ask Bill Graham, to really get on the record about his atrocities in Haiti, about what he did in Haiti. So I was grilling him about how could you call Aristide a thug and a dictator when he had implemented programs that increased the literacy rate, that combated the HIV/AIDS epidemic, that increased the minimum wage. Even these international institutions like the World Bank had praised him at one point. How could you call him a thug and a dictator? So it was really grilling him extensively. But one thing I learned being a student at the Monk School is, from people like Bill Graham is, he genuinely felt what he did was the right thing. And being, having, another one of my professors was Janice Stein, who's a very much, a foreign policy establishment individual, and she often feels that everything she says is right, and she's a crusader for democracy and human rights, even though she very much supports the elite in Canada's foreign policy and supporting dictatorships and oppressing democratic forces abroad, with the Lima Group, NATO. So my education was being surrounded by people like that. So, to be able to do this docuseries that I did, it's my way of being able to challenge the narrative which I had been educated with, which I had been surrounded with, and to try to challenge that narrative and try to bring that to the Canadian people, the working class, and the Canadian left. So I know I feel like I've veered off a lot.
But, no. I think it's very important, because I think if the institution of capitalism, which is a combination of plutocracy, of corporatism, of semi NGOs and whatnot, I mean, I mean, corporations. It's the documentary, The Corporation, diagnosed corporations as being sociopaths, and yeah, there are there are some elites, and there are some on the left who who know what they're doing is evil and it's going to have all these devastating consequences, but it's going to be great for their NGO because they're going to exploit the country. It's going to be, and the Canadian state knows it's going to be good for them and their corporate partners. So there's that kind of like sociopath. But then there are also people who literally just smell their own bullshit and think that they are doing good. That whole white savior complex, white man's burden bullshit, and like the whole missionaries, NGOs are just secular missionaries, and I think that's where the whole stand with Ukraine, despite the fact that Zelensky is privatizing everything, despite the fact that there are neo-Nazis and people who recognize Nazi collaborators, and then the same goes to like the pro Hong Kong separatist movement or the Uyghur extremism. or the Taiwan people who are also like not a progressive force either. I mean some of them are, but certainly the ones that the West are going to empower are a bunch of reactionary forces. So, but then that leads to this second to last question, which is when do you all think Canada is going to get to the point where people just stop buying this bullshit of Canada being a force for good in the world, and where the left is just as outspoken against Canadian imperialism, rejects the thesis that Canada was ever a force for good in the world, like the movement that exists in the U.S. or in Britain. When you think Canada is going to get to that level, the way Canada is at a level where Canada speaks out against settler colonialism and whatnot.
Well,
yeah.
I wouldn't I don't know, glorify how it is in the US is so great or in Britain is so great. I think that the nationalistic kind of not focusing on the imperialism of one's country is pretty powerful, and for that matter, I've seen it play out with Ugandans, right, and what Uganda's done in Congo, and I've talked to Ugandans who basically just sort of either apologize for or ignore the Ugandan military's role in Congo. So I don't think this is not something that's just unique to Canada. There's a particulars to Canada, and I think that it is worth keeping that clear about how there's some of this sort of mythology about Lester Pearson, peacekeeping, benevolent Canada. This stuff is something somewhat particular to Canada. But yeah, I mean, I don't think there is any sort of answer to that question, except it's the more work that is done on these issues, the more people that will be. I don't like. I think you can overcome. You can even overcome people's, in some cases, narrow self-interest. Right. Mostly you can overcome their sort of their kind of historical, what Tyler was talking about the getting the working class bought into settler colonialism through getting land, and that's important historical material benefit. And there are many different material benefits, like even at the level, I mean, obviously the office towers of downtown Toronto benefit from having Toronto as being the global hub of mining, right? And that trickles, quite frankly, all the way down to people who clean office towers, right? Like even at the more exploited end of the working class, that even trickles down at some level to that. I think that like there are elements that you can how big a self-interest, you're generally not going to convince the people who are making their massive dividends off of owning these stocks and stuff like that, that, mining companies, that these resources should not be exploited by foreign companies. You're not going to, convince them of that. But you can probably convince maybe some of the people who are lawyers for these companies on the grounds that the moral argument and the horrors of what happened, so the point being is there's no specific answer to that. I do think that there's sort of two kind of major elements. One is that you just need to plug away at some of these issues, and then I don't think you're ever going to overcome it without a change to the social system, right? You need a, call it a movement for economic democracy, call it a socialist movement, call it a ending of Canadian capitalism, call it an overthrow of the colonial order in Canada, whatever you want to call that exactly. That's important part of leading towards people being able to sort of consider these ideas or think of themselves as internationalists or view themselves as it's okay and right to be critical of Canada's foreign policy history. But I think that the most important point for people who are listening is to raise these issues and to get engaged in political groups that are challenging the structural issues at hand.
Tyler, your response, and then Petsa.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and I think Yves makes a good point about the way that even working class people are still, to a certain extent implicated. They're materially implicated in colonialism, but I think we can also, amongst ourselves with the working class, we can make the argument that fundamentally we all stand to gain by overthrowing the capitalist social order and destroying the national capitalist projects that divide us. We are all burning. We are burning the planet, and we are all going to burn in its fires if we don't urgently transform the social order in which humanity lives. We all stand to benefit by ending capitalist exploitation, both of workers in Canada by Canadian capitalists and of workers around the world by Canadian capitalists, and for that matter, by workers around the world by non-Canadian capitalists, by Chinese capitalists, by Ugandan capitalists, by capitalists everywhere. We all stand to benefit by changing the social structure of our world. So, I think people get drawn into nationalist projects, and ultimately that undermines our own interest. Our own interest, for the most part, the vast majority of us, outside of a handful of asshole billionaires, the vast majority of us stand to benefit by changing, by ending capitalism and changing the way that the world is organized. Nationalism is a project that is designed in many ways. Well, actually, really, modern nationalism comes out of specifically the moment at which the working classes became deeply revolutionary in the late 1800s and early 1900s. The nationalism modern nationalism as we understand it, comes specifically out of that moment when the ruling classes, particularly in Europe, recognized that they absolutely urgently needed to get the working class on side with them, rather than organizing together internationally against the capitalist classes. And World War I was kind of this, crucial moment for that, was this extremely central, pivotal moment in the question of, will the working class fight for the flag or will they fight against it? They honestly, for the capitalist class, they barely got through it. The war ended with a revolution in Russia, a revolution in Germany, a revolution in Hungary, one in Ireland, almost revolution in Spain and Italy. I mean, the social order almost ended in that moment, and they found a way. Unfortunately, they found a way to defeat it, and reinstill a nationalism in us, that really almost got lost. And I mean, the context in Canada is a little bit different, as we've discussed, but fundamentally, nationalism is something that exists to benefit the ruling class, to get us on side with them. And I think, keeping that in mind always as we do all the other work that we do. And, you've made the point, just keep making, keep doing the work, keep getting out there, keep trying to reach people, keep trying to bring this stuff out. I think that's what we do, and doing it with that sense of what nationalism is, and trying to, talk to people about what nationalism is and whose interest it serves. For me, that I think is an important piece.
Petsa, before I get to the last question.
Yeah, I think if I understood your question, Youri, it's really what would it take for the Canadian left to have the sense of enlightenment, I guess. And I think it's I'm reminded of this quote by Coretta Scott King about struggle being a never-ending process. Freedom is never really won. You earn it, in every generation. And I think that it's just through relentless grassroots agitation, solidarity. Just to think of one example, the NDP for the longest time, and I think Yves knows this better than anybody. For the longest time, the NDP had been such staunchly pro-Israel. You would have to confront and bombard, the NDP leader, like even Jagmeet Singh, at like coffee shops or whatever, just to try to get him to say something about what's going on, with Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories. And it was just through relentless solidarity building that there was a motion passed at the NDP convention, where the NDP had adopted the policy of really sanctioning Israel, for its occupation of the Palestinian territories, and really having that as its policy. And that took years and years and years and decades even of just relentless pressure. So I think that's just one example of what the Canadian left, really can be doing. It's just a relentless, endless struggle, and there has to just be a level of conviction and determination to really be able to overcome this huge media brainwashing, but all under this banner of nationalism. It has to just be an active effort to penetrate and dismantle that. But it's just an endless struggle.
Final question. The 4th of July is coming up, and I am going to be doing a 4th of July special, shitting on that grotesque, obnoxious Patriot Day. And since Americans love to lionize the Canadian healthcare system, and since Americans go, I really wish our Democrats were like your liberals, or I wish we had like an NDP party in our country. Okay, that's all bullshit. We're not going to spend any time doing that. But if you wanted to give free, unsolicited advice to the Americans, I have to ask this question. What do you think it's going to take for the American left to stop overlooking the plight of Indigenous people and make that a top 5, top 10, top 3 major issue, like Black Lives Matter, Queer Lives Matter, Latinx Lives Matter, immigrants, illegal or otherwise, lives matter, the environment, anti-imperialism, and Palestine justice?
I don't have any particular insights to that, but I mean, it's just obviously raising it. I think there has been some indications, the kind of a fight against the pipeline, the TXL, that was, I think, observing from afar, was a good example of sort of bringing together Indigenous rights in the U.S. and anti, climate Armageddon kind of politics. So there's other, unfortunately, there's so many different ecologically damaging kind of pipelines and other dynamics that there would be lots of ways of merging coalitions on sort of that front. But again, it's just a matter of raising it. And so I think I salute you. You have raised this. I know you've raised this a lot in lots of different forums, Youri. So I think that that's, one of the small steps in doing that.
Well, thank you for that, Eve. Tyler.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree, and I think there is a long tradition of indigenous struggle in the U.S., just as there is here, and in fact, across both countries, rejecting the nationalist, projections of the settlers. So, the American Indian movement, for instance, was a really, really significant part of the 20th century struggles for justice here, and yeah, the fights that Yves mentioned. I'm thinking of phenomenal book by Nick Estes recently, "Our History is the Future." There's a lot of indigenous organizing happening in the U.S. and yeah, I mean, it is just a matter of continuing to draw the links between these different struggles, and constantly identifying the pitfalls of nationalism. And I think the more we do that, the more we point out, as we do in Canada, as people do in the U.S., that those are that there is no liberation to be found in nationalism. Then that opens us up to a lot of these other avenues of struggle that are really important. So,
and Pizza, your response to that?
Yeah, I would just echo the same of what Yves and Tyler said. I don't think I could say it any better, so I'll just end it there.
That Canadian politeness, the modesty. Well, okay, I think all right, but I think that's probably a good place to end it. But just before we end, you guys can answer this question very briefly. Yves, on this Canada Day, what should we really be celebrating in Canada? In Canada, or any particular figures you think that people should study about and read, and that's who we should be celebrating, as opposed to this, patriotic, enforced patriotic holiday.
Yeah, I think that it should celebrate Indigenous resistance and should support land back movements.
Tyler.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I'm wearing I showed this earlier, but Yves, I don't think you saw, I'm wearing my Louis Riel shirt. And yeah, I mean, I think we should be celebrating, Indigenous struggles, the incredible accomplishments, the incredible fact that despite an attempted genocide against them, Indigenous people have built movements against the Canadian state and sustained them and maintained them to this day, and that land back is an expression we all know and have heard, and that continues to be pushed. I mean, that is just an incredible testament to their struggles and their capacities, and that's worth celebrating. You asked at the start, about if there's anything good to be found in Canada, and my answer was no, there isn't. There are things in Canada, currently in Canada, worth celebrating, and Indigenous struggles are just one of the many things in Canada that are worth celebrating. And hopefully, at some point in the not too distant future, we will celebrate those things in something that is not Canada, in some other political structure, under some other kind of authority, hopefully, driven by the working classes and by Indigenous people. So, that's what I think is worth celebrating.
Pizza, final words.
Yeah, I think that we need to celebrate the struggle of the Indigenous people, the Indigenous solidarity towards Indigenous resistance. But I also think how people should be spending Canada Day, if I could slightly modify the question, is spending Canada Day learning about the atrocities that Canada has historically committed and continues to commit, and what we can be doing, both Canada's atrocities domestically, but also on a global scale, and what Canadians we can be doing to put an end to it. To learn from our history and to see to seek that it not continue or be repeated in other forms. So I think that's the best way to spend Canada Day. That's how I've been spending it, really.
Yeah, and we also should be celebrating, the audience, this is how all of y'all should be celebrating Canada Day. Get Tyler's books, watch True to the Powerless of Pita, and get all of Yves Engler's books. and then join join an organization, or even start your own chapter of a World Beyond War, Canadian Peace Congress, or even start your own anti-imperialist, anti-settler colonial thing, which is inclusive to all of the marginalized groups. And I'm gonna celebrate because it's Pride. So I'm going to be, I can't be with my friends in London, my queer friends in London to celebrate Pride. So I have a date with a cigarette and Corona, and gonna be listening to some good reggae music, Queens of the Stone Age, and all that stuff. So, so we were joined on this 1+1. We were joined in the edition of 1+1 with Tyler Shipley. Too much to read in that title. A brilliant historian. Go check him out and be a student of his, and get his 2 books. We're also joined by Pita, the documentary filmmaker of Truth to the Powerless, a brilliant 6-part docuseries on Canada's imperialism, past and present. Yves has way too many books to read out, but we are also joined by Yves Engler, the Canadian historian, anti-imperialist thinker, NGO critic, media critic, member of Disruption Canada, member of the CFPI, and the host of the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour. People should subscribe to yvesengler.com. That way they'll get a notification of when Yves having his program, and they can join the live stream on Zoom and ask questions when Yves gets to that. Gentlemen, thank you all so much for coming on this Saturday. We on this special Canada Day special, shitting on Canada Day, and again, thanks to all of you. And hopefully we can do we could do another special 1+1 episode like this again. All right.
Thanks, Youri.
Yeah.
Good to see you all.
Yeah.